Welcome, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here, and this is going to be hopefully relatively short introduction to a new sort of small mod that I made called Expanded U.S. Ministers. Mostly, Secretary of State, Minister of War, those type people. I'm working on a sort of improved government mod, generally speaking. And I saw how few ministers the U.S. had, as well as I realized a bunch of the portraits were just generic portraits that were used for them. So I decided I needed to add more, and I might as well do historically correct images for them. And while I'm working on it, I thought, well, let's release a version for the standard game, and I believe this will also work, at least for currently, with Black Ice, so I won't need to make a special version for Black Ice. Okay, let's talk about these people here. So if all you want to know is it adds more ministers. It works with any mod that doesn't change the ideas file for the US. Work as is. If there's another major mod out there that this doesn't work with, that you would like it to work with, you can let me know. I can take a look to see if I can make a patch version. Happy to do so. Okay, so that's, you can stop watching if that's all you want to know about. That's what this does. Now I'm going to give a little bit of a history lesson to who some of these people are. I've looked them all up on Wikipedia. Many of the names are somewhat familiar to me anyways, just from watching and reading documentaries, and recently was reading Churchill's histories of World War II, and of course he was talking a lot about Harold Ickes here. That's the only one that I really didn't like the paradox image for him, so I made another one for him. So Harold Ickes, he was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's sort of right-hand man. He was probably the most powerful person, more powerful than people in the State Department in dealing with other nations. Yeah, okay, Democratic reformer, fine, but I would go with something else. Oh, also, eventually, when I get around to Uncle Sam's events, all of these guys will get, like I do for Third Reich events, will get unique traits. Might be somewhat reflective of the traits that are here, but will be worked how I see them historically. So Harold Ickes, was sort of Franklin's personal ambassador to the world, if you will. Not the ambassadors of the U.S. The U.S. ambassador to Britain at the time was John Wynant. You want improved relations. He's a good one. He's one of the ones that's in the original game that now has a unique portrait. Some of these are taken from photos that I've done. Others are from paintings. So that painting is just sort of washed out. Unfortunately, the photo I have of that, so it doesn't quite look as good as some of the others. Don't know a lot about Wynant, but he was, through the State Department's main day-to-day business person relating governmentally with Britain, and important posts. So he should be there, and I guess Compassionate Gentleman's a decent subscriber. So we're jumping around a little bit, but let's get back up here. Earl Broder, I guess is how you would pronounce his last name, was very much of a communist revolutionary, and if you've watched my series, I am vehemently against communist revolutionaries and think that they are people that really ultimately need to do evil to achieve their aims. Recently saw a quote of Winston Churchill's was, "The main vice of capitalism is that its blessings are unevenly distributed. The main vice of socialism is its miseries are equally distributed." So everyone's miserable in socialism. Yay. Everyone equally miserable in capitalism. Everyone has blessings, just some have even more blessings. So you want fairness or you want freedom? You know. Okay. They call him Charles Coughlin here. You can maybe tell by the collar. I normally call him Father Coughlin. He was, during the whole time in this period, an active Catholic priest. They have him here as a fascist demagogue. I would say that's reasonably accurate, but he's sort of a left fascist. You can sort of look at the Nazis and sort of at the Mussolini's fascism. Now realize Mussolini's fascism, he's named after, you know, Benito Mussolini is named after Benito Juarez, the former president of Mexico. His parents were steeped in socialism. That's how Mussolini brought up, and then he changed over to fascism, a bit more right-wing. Charles Coughlin comes out of sort of the Democratic Party, thinks the Democrats aren't going far enough, and it's, you know, sort of National Socialism without vehement anti-Jewishness, but he was, yeah, fascist, but definitely comes out of the democratic tradition. I know a lot of Europeans really don't understand right and left wing and what they mean in America. They often look at it through their eyes, and similarly, when we look at them, we don't know both systems. So he's if you want to change your government over to have a fascist America, he's the guy you put there. That's what these three are. You want to keep democracy strong, you have him, or convert back over to it. If for some reason you lose it, these are to move to either communism or fascism. That's what to do. Edward Stenenius Jr. Let's see, I'm still talking here, and I'm going over, I have these people up on Wikipedia while I'm talking to be a little bit better. Okay, it's, yeah, December 1944, he becomes Secretary of State for the U.S. So he's in charge of the late war foreign policy. He was very much active before that. He replaces Cordell Hull. He was the primary Secretary of State, so Foreign Minister of the U.S. Again, he's the government's sort of foreign minister, where Harold Ickey is FDR's. As time goes on, Cordell Hull is getting sicker and sicker, and so eventually, in late '44, leaves the post. But Stenenius has long been sort of doing the jobs as Deputy Secretary of State. Cordell Hull, one of the big notoriety things he did was, leading up to World War II, he is the primary person responsible for the SS St. Louis being not allowed into the being allowed to dock in the United States. Might want to know what's so big deal about that. Well, it was filled with Jewish refugees that had fled Germany, hired the ship first where it went to Cuba, then tried to get to the U.S. Cordell Hull was the main person working as Secretary of State, and even though there was some pressure in the U.S. government to try to let the Jews in, he made sure they stayed out and that they went back to Europe, and most of them died in death camps. So you can thank Cordell Hull for our anti-Jewish immigration policies of the Democrats. That they very much, the old white boys club was really very much a Democratic Party situation. The sort of multiracial party in America at the time, if you will say that, because yeah, you notice all these are all white guys, of course, but the much more multiracial party was the Republican Party at the time. So you can look at, so that sort of gives our foreign ministers. I know we're jumping around. Okay, now let's come up to Harry Woodring. Right now it's just, and I didn't know until I did this, they didn't include a localization file, which gives it a cool name, World War I Trauma. Basically the thing, and it's mainly set up for the AI, is probably why they didn't do it, is he was a staunch isolationist. He was, starting at this time period of 36, he was the Secretary of War for the United States, but he was a staunch isolationist. I think I'm going to see if I can find a trait that, and there, I think there is one that makes building ships easier. Isolationists in America, generally speaking at this time, since, yeah, sure, Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart, you know, had both flown alone across the Atlantic, and others had flown in groups across the Atlantic, and even by this time they were, well, there were several different companies that either island hopped or had been in the 20s landing out at sea to ships that they knew where they were, and they would be refueled, sort of seaplanes, big seaplanes that carried, say, 20 passengers, refueled and take off, doing that. And starting about this time, you had the big clipper ships, which are also seaplanes that would make transatlantic flights, or like the German Condors, that could make one-way trips across the Atlantic. Nobody was, without stopping at Hawaii and Wake and whatever, nobody was making it across the Pacific. But it was entirely impractical to attack the United States effectively, except via the sea. You know, round trips and carrying bombs and able to do stuff was just, at this time, an impossibility. And as when I play, I, you know, sort of often, if I'm in Germany trying to invade, I island hop, you know, across the northern land masses up there. I don't know if they're all islands, or try to invade, you know, down through Latin America and sort of country hop up. Well, that, of course, could all be stopped by a vigorous Navy. So I'm thinking about changing him over to something that would promote as Secretary of Defense, greater shipbuilding, as, you know, keep all those foreign troubles away from America. He was fired as Secretary of Defense within about the first year of the war, because nobody really liked him that was trying to run the war, and he was still, we shouldn't be in the war kind of attitude. Not a good situation for dealing with major war. Now, John Garner, he was the and I had to look these up because I, of course, knew the last vice president of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, was, of course, Harry Truman. I mean, obviously, everyone knows that, who pays any attention. He succeeded him, last president who dropped the atomic bomb that ended the war. But he only really just sort of showed up there at the end of it. But John Garner was the first vice president at this time period. Rather sort of a good, studious type from reading about him. The other one, and I definitely knew the name, and I wasn't quite immediately associating it because he was also doing other jobs as well during this time. So often associated with others, was Henry Wallace. He replaces Garner as vice president when the 1940 election. So Garner doesn't get into. Now the FDR, of course, is the longest serving U.S. president in history. And there had been problems with the New Deal, so he needed to sort of change some faces. So it was between these two men here, Henry Wallace and Jesse H. Jones. They had both, let's see. Gotta look that up because they're confusing names. Sorry for the pause here. Oh, okay. Well, not terribly important, but the exact names of the organizations. Henry Wallace was a vigorous, active socialist. Not saying he was the communist revolutionary, no, but he was a staunch socialist. Bit more of a socialist than FDR, and during the Depression. Although there had the Great Dust Bowl going on for parts of America, out here they were using, in fairly arid regions, they were using farming techniques that were good in this part of the country and good in areas of Europe that got lots of rainfall, and doing that for 10 or 20 years or 40 years in a big, vigorous way just destroyed this part of America ability to create food, and once it went bad in one area of the dust, it was, you can look some documentaries up, it just swept across here. That's part of the reason America was in such a Great Depression. It wasn't entirely government policies, but it was, I would say, mainly, but there was this contributing to it. But even with that, there was still great abundance in America, and some foods a lot of people couldn't afford, and a lot of people couldn't afford any foods just because they were out of jobs, but some were, some sort of high-end, idea of beef or something was, more expensive than chicken or pork, and limited meats and other things. Wallace's, and they did this for a while, Wallace's plan was every third row of food, destroy it, or destroy 1/3 of your livestock. Just kill it and get rid of it. That way to keep the prices high. So you got starving people in America, and we're destroying food to keep the prices high, because if you don't have the prices high, the prices will be too low and the farmers will go out of business, because often they have loans, so they need to make some level of payments for those kind of stuff. They need some level of money in. But if they just can't get enough for their food, just destroy it. That's sort of his policies. Now, he's an ideological crusader. And obviously the vice president. His main rival in all of this was Jesse H. Jones. Watched a nice documentary on him. Heard of him before, but not too much, mainly because of his association with Houston, but he was working in charge of a different governmental agency. He had come out of a farming background, but learned how to use credit really well, and he set up within his own agency, and it spread, and actually I think entirely supplanted Wallace's vision, is that they would buy the food from the farmers, warehouse it. This is obviously food that could be warehoused. Warehouse it, because you get the right seasons, you get a flood of the food on the market, so you buy it at enough of a price, take enough of it off the market, not to like buy all their crops, but buy enough of the general outproduce of the farmers, as well as some other industry stuff. He was in charge of saving the banking industry as well as some other things, the rail industry and several other major industries. So buy a percentage, maybe a third of the farmers produce, and warehouse it, and wait the 4 or 6 months for prices to rise back up, because at the harvest season everything's cheap. Then once there now becomes a bit of a scarcity, then sell it. And he was able to sell off all of the farm products for a profit for the U.S. government. All of the money for a lot of the banks, and they started out loaning money to the banks, but then eventually he set up a situation where if your bank needed money, or if your railway company needed money, you sold shares of your company to the government for that money to save your stuff. Eventually, Jesse H. Jones, all of his, at least all of the major products, or dealing with the companies, all paid back to the government with the preset interest. So the government actually made money out of saving the situation. So he is not a ideological socialist, but he believes in government and business action. He very much believed in that. So he wasn't a free market capitalist, but he was a government interventionalist into the system, but on a sensible thing. And reading a little bit more about him, because I got interested in all this stuff, he then moves, as the war is starting in the build-up, I think right around 1940, he becomes, from head of this agency, which he has more control of more money than any person probably in history, singly to his billions, that he didn't have to get approval from anybody, from the president, from Congress. He could just give it to anybody he felt like. And he kept in charge of that agency, as well as becoming Secretary of Commerce. And under Secretary of Commerce, he is the main person responsible for building up of the industry to fight World War II. I look at him very much as the Albert Speer of America in many ways. So I made him a captain of industry for America. So if you want to build that up, he is the best person to do so. Okay. Taft, I don't know why he was sort of a he was a Republican, sort of an anti New Dealer to some degree, but also another sort of staunch isolationist. Republican, obviously. FDR is a Democrat. Henry Stimson here. Another major player in the industry game. So he produces military factories. Donald Nelson here. I looked him up. I have yet to find a good color image of him. That does not. This is a generic image. He was bald, so don't look anything like him. And all of the pictures show him smoking a pipe. So I guess that's part of his trademark thing. He was put in charge of actual military production, where Jesse H. Jones was put in charge of building up the industry. He was sort of in charge of, and Jones should maybe, definitely that refinery construction speed. He is the main person responsible for getting synthetic rubber going up in an industrial way in the U.S., where Donald Nelson was mainly in charge of the armaments production, and particularly the Army disliked him immensely. He was a vacillator. He had incredible hard trouble dealing with competing requests for different things that, all competing with each other, and so it just didn't work out well for him. They tried to get rid of him a few times. Eventually it gets to the point that FDR is going to get rid of him, and then Harold Ickes steps in and advises FDR that he'll look weak if you give in to the Army. It was mainly the Army that was, not that the Navy, well, you got to remember, the Air Force is part of the Army because it's the Army Air Corps. So in that level, he's dealing with the Army. So the other is the Navy. Not that the Navy, I don't think, particularly liked him or anything. There's just no comment on that. But it was very much the Army that was actively trying to get rid of him as dealing with armaments production. And I think, yeah, okay, so that's it. I think we've gone through all of these. So that's sort of a brief overview of history and my analysis of it. Like I say, in time, not soon, but someday, I will make unique characteristics. Now, again, because I would like comment on it, what I'm thinking of doing is, and you can look at the Third Reich events I posted on the thread for this, do it as well, is get rid of these 3 slots here and add in 3 unique slots, like, you know, like these are unique, because I can have 3 guys here that are all in charge of various industry. You know, I can get Jesse H. Jones, armaments, and war industries, and stick them all here and sort of overwhelm industries. I sort of don't like that. You know, obviously, since I'm playing the game and that's how you do it, and if I want to maximize production, that's what I do. But I don't like that as a concept, because the government is a balance of things. That's sort of what prompted me to do this, is I plan on having one as sort of deputy, which, if I can make these titles unique to a country, and I think I can through localization file, just haven't tried it yet, he'd be called vice president. So it would start out with John Garner here, and you'd have options of changing over to Henry Wallace or not, and that kind of thing. So you'd have that. You'd have Secretary of War, because that's what it was called until after World War II, would be another one. Now with Germany, since Germany still very much, the army was not under the civil government in Germany at any time. Well, maybe under Hindenburg, sort of. Under the Kaiser's government, the Kaiser was head of government and head of the army. And even though later Kaisers became less and less active in the command sense, because it goes back very much to Frederick the Great, who was much more of a general than he was a statesman, though he was also a statesman and a government leader. So they never had, until sometime after World War II, a Minister of Defense or a Minister of War, or whatever you want to call it, in Germany. It was always the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the overcommand of the armed forces, not the OKW. There was the OKH, which was the Overkommando Heer, meaning army or others. So for the German one, it would be the OKW would be instead of Secretaries of War. But go on to like for Britain, Churchill, once he was made Prime Minister, he was also at that time made the Minister of Defense. So he held 2 primary ministry head titles at the same time. So we'd have that. We would have a foreign minister, or if I do Secretary of State for the U.S. Then we have economics, which whether you set someone who is more setting up industry, or whether you set someone up who is more armaments production that boosts military armaments, there would be that one. Then there would be what I'm generically calling Interior Minister. There is an Interior Ministry in the U.S. today, but they really don't have any real. I mean, I think they run the Fish and Game, or is that Commerce Department? I don't They're not like in Germany. The Interior Ministry sort of runs the police department, and I think that isn't the case in some other countries. In the U.S., it's more like running the Parks Department and some other things like that. So that Interior Minister would include people like these, you know, Democratic Reformer and Communist Revolutionary type slots could fill that, or people that are popping to mind in it, and I have to look up in some of these other countries. But obviously somebody like boy, I'm blanking on him, the little dwarf kind of guy, Minister of Propaganda. Oh man, I'm blanking. And I know you all know I know him very well. That is killed his kids. Boy, I'm picturing him. I know who he is. And I know you know the Minister of Propaganda, and I'm not going to tell you. Joseph Goebbels. Boy, I was blanking on Goebbels. That was a complete blanking moment. Something that I know well, but just couldn't get that name up. Joseph Goebbels, so, you know, a propaganda minister type, because I don't want just a propaganda minister slot. So this would be, who do you want to sort of run domestic policy most, you know, or to be the most heavy emphasis at the moment. So whether you want a propagandist, or do you want another one I thought for Germany would be sort of the Minister of Labor, or, you know, the Deutsches Arbeiters Front, the DAF, you know, with Robert Ley, or somebody like that. That would be the another sort of interior kind of government type people. And then the sixth final one would be internal security type guy. Obviously a prominent one for Germany would be Himmler, but you also have Frick, who was for a long time the Minister of the Interior for Germany, and for until it all finally got up under Himmler, was you know, sort of in charge of the police for a while. And I'm also, since we don't really have intelligence at this time, maybe stick in some of the intelligence people like Wilhelm Canaris or somebody like that, that would sort of, you know, run a non-Gestapo intelligence agency internally. I don't know. But so we would have that. I know this is getting long. I intended to keep this short, but I'm talking about this. So again, if you haven't, this has gone on past this, and I may just make a short version, probably in a long version of this. So that I'm thinking of doing those 6 slots, which would be their own row. You'd still have these 3 things going on. The other thing I'm planning on doing is down here, is to take this and create like there is a chief of the army, which would be different than the defense or war or OKW. He would be the, in the German sense, the OKH, and then 2 Army High Command guys, so that, you know, you could pick 2 out of however many the country has and put them here. And then similarly for the Navy, you'd have the guy in charge of the Navy, and then you'd have 2 sub-slots. So, and eventually I'm thinking, like for the U.S., one that would be a battleship specialist or advocate or whatever. Another one would be a carrier war advocate. Another one would be a submarine warfare, you know, commerce rating advocate. Another one would be a convoy organizer type guy that would benefit convoy protection. And another one would be, say, a amphibious warfare specialist or advocate or whatever. And so if so you can sort of change it up as what you're mainly focusing on as the sub, as well as obviously you can change, you know, Chief of the Navy and their specialties. You'd have the choice of 2. So somebody like Britain will probably always have, at least if there's more than one, and depending on historical and good information I can find, there might be more than one. But Britain, probably one of the sub-slots would always be the convoy protection specialist, just because you're dealing with Britain. Who the second slot would change out periodically as Britain's needs would change. So that's how I'm looking at that, and obviously similarly with the Air Force. Now I don't know that, and there is a method that for these slots that you can create. I don't fully understand it. I sort of looked at it. I sort of kind of get it. Maybe I'm overthinking it. It's for a lot of the minister types for countries like Bulgaria and Greece are sort of randomly generated, generic type slots and names, and so I think I can expand that to the new slot types to some degree. But then this is why Bulgaria, even if they somehow defeated Romania and somehow defeated Greece, they're never going to become a major, because they will never have all the good, necessarily, ministers to set up and do that. And it's why Poland, even if Poland takes the Baltic states, and even if Poland somehow takes Czechoslovakia, they're really not going to become a major, not in the 10 to 15 year time span that this game is designed to be played in. If you're trying to turn it into EU 20th century, that's a different story. Totally different story. To my mind, a totally different game. I'm a big fan of EU. Played the hell out of EU 1 way back in the day. But, you know, that I'm totally with the idea that Ireland can somehow grow to be something new. But it's a different thing. The other thing, additionally, I'm looking at is theorists. I want to do an army, a navy, an air force, and a scientific theorist. That would be specialists. So it would be just basically taking these guys and eventually adding some more. So obviously you get, you know, Oppenheimer is the, you know, one of the scientists and the rocket scientists. Would just be, so you'd have to a point is, and whether, I don't know who else we eventually maybe come up with, you would just have, instead of having got to pick one of all 8 of these, you could have, you know, the one scientist, you'd have the one army, the one air force, and the one navy sort of theorist as the dominant theorist at times. So that's what I'm looking at for the expanded government mod that I'm working on. And it's, I was hoping to get it, quite honestly, I was sort of thinking I would cram through and get it done this weekend. But I'm having a little problem is I've tried to, because these are the, you know, sort of the placeholder slots. I've got it so that this element works and all this element, but it sort of puts a circle here with a plus sign in the middle. I don't know if it's supposed to be a cross or a plus sign as sort of the blank one, but when I try to specify, actually I would try to rename these buttons, and I do, it doesn't seem to work. I can rename these because they're sort of these that go in there, sort of the want to have different placeholders, so that's sort of the one technical aspect I haven't got working yet. So otherwise it works. The slots and all work, the descriptions and all that works, except for the non-standard slots don't have a cool blank placeholder setting, and when I try to rename it and specify these, it actually just disappears the whole thing, because it's sort of making it as if it's one of these, but it's not. Maybe you don't understand, so I don't know. But if any of you modders who happen to be seeing this know either what I'm doing wrong once I put it up there, or maybe it's just an engine limitation. That's because I sort of found at first I thought it was completely an engine limitation, and that was partially the button situation that was disappearing before. But I saw somebody else make the slots and seemed to work. Now the only thing he was changing, though, I noticed he started to do, I forget the guy's name, it's the New World Order mod. I'm doing different stuff, but what he's added are new laws, and that works, and he's remmed out some minister types, some similar to what I was doing, some different, but so that could be why he also ran into that brick wall as well. So sort of a hard-coded, I think, thing. So, but I think it'll work. It'll just be ugly, which I don't like, but get it out there. Maybe that ugly and get it out there and give a demand enough for popular demand, get Paradox to somehow make it less hard-coded. I don't know how difficult or easy it is, but So that's it. I want to thank you for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. If you're going to go for this expanded U.S. government packs or any of my mods, can you please upvote them, give them thumbs up on Steam. Obviously if you're downloading them, you're subscribing to them, you're already signed in. Just if you think it's worthy, just give them, I like, lots of upvotes to give better prominence to it, if you would there. And thanks so much. See you next time. This is going to take because it's turned out to be long. I'm going to post this as an alternate to playing an episode. Sorry about those who wanted more action on the current series, but I want to get this up there. So thanks a lot. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.